Darkcast Network, the light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Content warning ahead. This podcast contains very sensitive topics such as missing persons, unsolved cases, haunted houses, and paranormal activity. These type of topics can contain very upsetting and sensitive details and stories. Please listen responsibly. Welcome to Misty Mysteries. I'm your host, Keely, and this is a True Crime and Paranormal podcast. Today is the last episode of True Crime November, and I want to go out on a case where I not only learned more about DNA and forensic science, but more about how the law works on the side of the defense. Bear with me on this episode because it's not my normal content. I did a lot of research and learning for it. It's not unsolved, but it's a very important case. It does have a lot of names involved, so I will be calling everyone involved mostly by their first and last names for most of this episode to make sure everything is easier to follow. Today I am talking about the murders of Christine Morton and Debra Baker and the wrongful conviction of Michael Morton. Before diving into this week's episode, I want to tell you about this amazing small shop that has partnered with the Darkcast Network. Hi, I'm Keely, host of Misty Mysteries. I found the cutest little online shop on Etsy called Wick of the Wood. Wick of the Wood specializes in unique accent candles with an inventory that consists of one-of-a-kind handmade candles that fit every variety of spaces and aesthetics. Wick of the Wood always have their eye out for new candle molds, thrifted containers, and other inspirations. The idea that everyone can have a candle that fits whatever quirky space they need inspires Wick of the Wood to think outside of the candle mold and make any idea you might have a reality. Since she was just a little girl, the owner has always dreamt of making a little shop where she could sell homemade items. Under the watchful eye of her dog, the owner lovingly hand makes each item, packages them, and mails them out to you from Seattle, Washington. And you don't have to take it from me. Here's some testimonials from several Wick of the Wood customers. Susie, 5 stars. I've ordered from this shop and every time it's an amazing experience. Everything smells amazing and the packaging is always so cute and functional. This is my favorite candle shop. Tandra also gives Wick of the Woods 5 stars. These are so cool. I only burnt 3 so I could keep 1 for show. LOL. Another 5 stars from Dior, who says, the seller is so kind, beautifully packaged. The candles smell and look amazing. Bought it for my bestie and she loves it. Thank you. And thank you for the freebies too. Those are just a few of the amazing reviews of Wick of the Wood. You can check out Wick of the Wood at www.etsy.com/shop/Wick of the Wood. Follow Wick of the Wood on Twitter at Wick of the Wood. Thank you to Wick of Wood for working with all of us at the Darkcast Network. Personally, I really love what I've seen so far, but my favorite is this poison apple candle that as a Halloween and Disney lover takes my heart. Now let's dive into this week's topic, starting with Christine Morton. Christine was born on April 18th, 1955 in Houston, Texas as Christine Marie Kirkpatrick. Most information on Christine I could find was from her husband's book and some of her friends. Christine is described as popular her whole life. She was outgoing, nice, and found it easy to talk to whoever she was around. She was smart not only in school but overall. She could hold intelligent conversations and loved to debate with those around her. She was a very passionate person, which carried into her relationship with her husband, Michael. Christine and Michael first met at their college, Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. He first saw her in a shared class when his roommate was flirting with her, but when she turned his roommate down, Michael took his chance with Christine. Michael was throwing a party, and shortly after this party, they went on their first date, and the two were inseparable. Michael and Christine were not only inseparable, but all their friends could tell that they had a strong connection by just being around them. They talked about anything and everything, even when it meant they would argue. And when they argued hard. She was passionate, and this made their arguments loud. But all their arguments always ended in the two laughing together. Even though the two of them began college together, the two actually never finished college. At some point, Michael left college to live in Austin, Texas, and Christine followed him. Michael got a job at a grocery store stocking shelves, and Christine got a job at an insurance company. The two made plans to go back to college at Texas State University together, but when they found out that many of their credits from their previous college wouldn't transfer, they made the decision that one would work while the other went to college so they could both graduate while their lives continued outside education. But as many of us know, life goes on, and they moved up in their current jobs, ending up in managerial positions. They ended up getting married in April of 1979, and just a few years after marriage, in 1981, they ended up getting pregnant with a baby girl. Unfortunately, at her 22-week checkup, the sonogram showed that their baby girl did not have a heartbeat. The two were devastated, but ended up getting pregnant with their second child in 1983. This time they had a baby boy who they named Eric, and despite a very healthy pregnancy, Eric was born with health problems. The day he was born, he had to have surgery on his esophagus, but he was born with a hole in his heart, which he wasn't able to have surgery on until he was 3 years old or at least 30 pounds. While they had to wait for Eric's heart surgery, Eric had to be watched pretty closely and given medication on a schedule. Michael and Christine's friends described this as a very stressful time for the couple. The concern for their child's health started to affect their relationship. Michael began to make negative comments about Christine's weight and their sex life in front of the couple's friends. This made their friends very uncomfortable, but Christine would always tell them to ignore his comments and seem to brush them off, even though they were hurtful. Overall, though, the two loved each other no matter what, and they loved their son Eric. In June of 1984, Eric was finally able to get his heart surgery, and this was described as a fresh start for the family. This fresh start changed only 2 months later. August 12th, 1984 was Michael's 32nd birthday. He took the day off work to go scuba diving in Lake Travis, which he did pretty often. After scuba diving, he went home and took a nap before going to dinner with Eric and Christine. When they got home from dinner, Christine put Eric to bed, and Michael prepared for a special night. He set up some wine and a place to cuddle by the fireplace, but when they finally got their alone time, Eric ran out of his room, interrupting them. Christine had to go take him to put him back to bed, but when she went back to Michael, she ended up falling asleep. Michael went to bed alone, and Christine later joined him, telling him, "Sorry, next time, babe." Michael was left pretty upset that night, and when he woke up for work that morning on August 13th, he left a not-so-nice note for Christine on the vanity in the bathroom. This note does play a huge part in the case, so please keep that in mind as I read. The note read, "Chris, I know you didn't mean to, but you made me feel really unwanted last night. After a good meal, you came home, you binged the last of the cookies. Then with your nightgown around your waist, while I was rubbing your hands and arm, you farted and fell asleep. I'm not mad or expecting a big production. I'm letting you know how I felt without us having another fight about sex. Just think about how you might have felt if you were left hanging on your birthday. ILY. ILY meaning I love you." In relationships, I think most of us say or write things we shouldn't, or maybe could have put things in nicer ways to our partners. This note, I think, was definitely exactly that for Michael, especially considering what took place that day. After writing this note, Michael left for work by 5:30 a.m. like he did every single day, but it was far from the normal day. In the late morning hours, their neighbor Elizabeth Gee was gardening, and she noticed that Eric was going in and out of the front door, sitting on the steps of the porch, and peeking around the car to look at Elizabeth. She noticed that she had not seen Christine all morning and walked over to the house to pick up Eric. When she picked him up, she noticed he had a very heavy diaper and went inside to try to find Christine. Elizabeth, with Eric in her arms, called out for Christine but got no answer. So she took Eric to her house to be with her son while she went back to the Morton house to investigate where Christine could be. Inside the house, she went to the bedroom to find that the dresser drawers had been dumped out. The covers were tucked into the bed, and there was baskets and a blue suitcase piled on the bed. Elizabeth thought this was odd, so she pulled the covers and found Christine's wrist. She checked for a pulse, but there was no pulse. She ran home to call the police. While all of this was happening, Michael had no idea what was happening at his own home, till he got off work to find that Eric wasn't at the babysitter's house. The babysitter was very confused why he was there since Christine didn't even call her that day, and he was confused because Christine wouldn't just change the plans without letting him know. He used the babysitter's phone to call his home, and a man answered the phone. This man on the phone was Sheriff Jim Boutwell. He told Michael that he needed to come home right away. When he arrived home, all Michael saw was the police and crime scene tape. He tried to go inside but was stopped at the door by Sheriff Boutwell. Michael asked where Eric was, and he told him he was at a neighbor's house. Then he asked about Christine, and the sheriff told him she's dead. Sheriff Jim Boutwell had Michael come inside and read him his Miranda rights. The lead investigator, Sergeant Wood, then asked him to sign a consent form for his home and car to be searched. Sheriff Boutwell and Sergeant Wood questioned Michael about their marriage, their life, their sex life, any affairs, and his day for hours. They asked if he wrote the note, which he said yes, and he told them that he wished he hadn't written that note. He was then asked if anything was missing from the home, which he reported a .45 caliber missing from their dresser. At the house, fingerprints were found on the glass door that were never identified, that didn't match anyone in the house, and fingerprints were also found on the suitcase found on the bed. A fresh footprint was also found just outside the fence in their backyard. After hours of being questioned, Michael was finally allowed to see Eric, who he said looked like he had been crying and upset. The two stayed with the neighbors for a few hours and then returned home because Michael felt like he could still feel Christine in the home, so he wanted to be there to be with her just a little while longer. At home, he fed Eric, played with him for a little bit, and then put him to bed. When Michael went to his own bedroom that night, he walked into the bedroom to find blood on the ceiling and the headboard. Michael spent the night with Eric and walking around the house. That next morning, most of Christine's family was at the house, and so was Michael's. But he was mainly concerned about Eric and arranged a meeting with a therapist. She was able to tell Michael that Eric was just having separation anxiety. Most kids develop from having their parents pass away, and there was no signs that he was hurt by whoever took Christine's life. That day, more evidence was found by the family at the house. Christine's brother searched the house and the property, just combing it over, and he found a bandana that he turned over to the police. This bandana had a single hair and blood in it. At this time, the science couldn't determine whose blood was on the bandana, except for blood typing, but they didn't believe the hair matched Christine or Michael. A neighbor by the name of Orwin Holland, who lived a block away, also told the police patrolling the area on that day that his wife had seen a man in a dark green van park in an empty lot behind the Mortons' home. She saw this man walk up to their fence and look into their yard. Another neighbor by the name of David St. Martin also spoke to the police and told them that his wife Joni saw the same man the day Christine was killed after her husband had left for work. The police never followed up with these neighbors, and they figured that the investigation went a different way. And the investigation really did go a different way. From the start, especially with that not-so-nice note that Michael left, Sheriff Boutwell and Sergeant Wood really honed in on Michael as their top suspect. They even went as far as saying that he was the only suspect to Christine's family. As the investigation went on, Michael was brought in for questioning a second time. After hours of questioning on things that they already asked, which is actually often done since the police are looking for slip-ups in stories or information they were told before. But Michael wanted nothing to do with this since he was grieving his wife, working and trying to maintain a normal life and schedule for Eric. So he asked to take a polygraph to clear his name, and it was scheduled for the same evening of the second questioning. But when Michael showed up that evening, he was waiting for hours and ended up having to reschedule, mostly because he just felt he was being jerked around and disrespected. A few days passed after his first attempt to do a polygraph when he got a call that he needed to go to probate court since Christine did not have a will. So Michael called his attorney friend to discuss this, and his friend said to come by on a certain day and a certain time. When Michael said he couldn't because he needed to take a polygraph at that time and that day, This shocked his friend, who told him that he needed to have a defense attorney, and his friends set Michael up with Bill White and Bill Allison. Bill White told Michael never to talk to the police again and not to take a polygraph through them. If he takes a polygraph, it will be through an independent examiner. At this time, no one had passed a polygraph done by the county in the last 5 years. From the time of Christine's death, and while all of this was happening, Michael's mother was staying with them to help him care for Eric and maintain a normal life. But Michael knew he eventually had to ask his mom to go home, and he felt that he was ready on this particular day I'm going to talk about, because he needed to learn how to stand on his own. He asked his mom to leave, and she was very hesitant, but she left, and Michael was feeling good. That night, he was cooking dinner for him and Eric. The two were laughing and dancing, and the two just really felt like they were at home for the first time since Christine's murder, when they heard a knock on the front door. Michael opened the door to find Sheriff Boutwell, Sergeant Wood, and other officers that were there to arrest him for the murder of Christine. He was informed at that moment that the neighbors would be taking Eric till his parents got back in town. Luckily, Michael was able to get out on bail, but he was met with what most people have to deal with when accused of murdering the mother of their child and their wife. To add fuel to the fire, Sheriff Boutwell was taking part in interviews with the media where he was leaving out any evidence that may point to Michael's innocence. He left out that the glass door had been unlocked and had fingerprints. He left out the missing gun and a lot of evidence that was hidden to even the lawyers for 23 years, while pointing blame all on Michael. Sergeant Wood even went as far as to show up to a watch meeting of their neighborhood, asking them who suspected Michael and asked them to raise their hand if they thought that he did it too. While all this was happening, Michael was just trying to work and take care of Eric, but he was fired from his job. Michael was union, and they were able to take his case pro bono, getting him his job back until Michael was set to go to trial. As Michael and his defense attorneys got ready for trial, they found out that Sergeant Wood was not going to testify, who was the lead investigator in this case, and they thought he may be holding evidence specifically showing Michael's innocence. Michael's defense suggested that prosecutor Michael Kent Anderson did not want Sergeant Wood to testify, so he wouldn't have to hand over all of his findings and notes on the investigation. On February 6, 1987, a little bit before the trial, the judge that was presiding over the trial, Judge William Lott, ordered all the documents in the murder investigation to be handed over. Judge Lott got to look over the documents handed over to him. Judge Lott said that he did not find anything and had the documents sealed. The trial then went on as planned, beginning on February 9, 1987. During this trial, the prosecution argued that Michael beat Christine to death since she did not want to have sex with him on his birthday, and after she was dead, he then masturbated over her in a jealous rage. Well, the defense argued that someone broke into the house after Michael left for work, killed Christine, and then stole her purse, wallet, and the gun off the dresser. The killer then fled into the woods, and there was no evidence linking Michael to the murder. So the first piece of evidence in the trial that the prosecution really relied on was Christine's time of death. In court, Dr. Robert Bayardo said that her time of death was 1:15 a.m., but followed it with the fact that this was not a scientific statement. It's important to know that the time of death is not 100%, despite what we are told in TV shows, which I just learned in this case. They can go off of scientific methods, and the body will tell a lot after death, but time of death is often a guesstimated time by the examiner. For Dr. Robert Bayardo, he used the stomach content method to place a time of death. So with this method, the medical examiner will take a look at the stomach of the deceased. If the stomach is full, then you can place a time of death at least 2 hours after their last meal. If it is empty, then the death most likely took place at least 4 to 6 hours after the last meal. And if the small intestine is empty along with the stomach, the time of death has most likely taken place 12 or more hours after the last meal. If the large intestine is empty on top of the small intestine and the stomach, then the deceased had not eaten in most likely a day or two. This method, at least today, is not seen as very reliable, but it does allow for a rough guess for the time of death. Things that can affect this method would be the type of food being digested in the stomach. For example, a fiber-rich meal will digest faster than a protein or a carb-rich meal. Diseases such as IBS and Crohn's can also affect this, but this is a helpful method in cases such as poison or toxins and bacteria. In Christine's autopsy, we don't know the findings of her stomach and why he gave the time of death of 1:15 a.m. in court, but when he did the initial autopsy, her time of death was believed to be around 6 a.m. This was even confirmed by Sheriff Boutwell in early interviews to the media, when he shared her time of death as sometime after 6 a.m. So we can better understand the case. Let's go over the autopsy findings that are public. Christine's cause of death was from blunt force trauma to the skull with an unknown wooden object. A wooden object was only able to be identified due to splintered wood found during the autopsy. Now, during the trial, the prosecution really pushed that her time of death was 1:15 a.m., and they pushed it as scientifically proven, using this argument in their closing statement to the jury. The next big piece of evidence that the prosecution used to defend their argument against Michael was a stain found on the couple's bedsheets. The medical technician who took the stand, Donna Stanley, was the one who tested the stain. When she took the stand, she told the court that this stain only tested positive for sperm cells of Michael Morton, backing the prosecution's claim that Michael had masturbated over Christine during the crime. Michael's defense team had no idea about this finding, and they could not cross-examine her during the trial without the knowledge of her findings. Michael's trial went on for 8 days until February 17th, when the jury of 7 men and 7 women took 2 hours to decide Michael was guilty of his wife's murder. Michael was sentenced to life in prison. While in prison, Michael tried to make the best out of a bad situation. He used this time to get a bachelor's degree and a graduate's degree in psychology. Meanwhile, outside of the prison, Michael and his family were in the process of losing Eric. Christine's family, like most families hurting from something like this, began to fight for custody of Eric. For the custody battle over Eric, Judge Lott, who presided over Michael's trial, granted custody to Christine's family, and Eric was sent to live with Christine's sister, his aunt. Michael was given visitation rights for 1 visit every 6 months until Eric turned 18, and Michael's family was still regularly involved in Eric's life. It wasn't until he was 15 Eric made the decision to write Michael, telling him that he no longer wished to visit him in prison. Well, Eric grew up with his aunt, and Michael not only worked on his education, but worked in hard labor prisons. His defense attorney never stopped fighting for him. In March of 1987, they sent their first retrial request after District Attorney Mike Davis made a comment to the jury after the trial was over about an inch-thick stack of police reports, which they never saw. This request was denied. Then in 2000, they filed for the bedsheets to be retested. This was granted, and it was found that Donna Stanley was scientifically incorrect. The stain had both DNA from Michael semen and Christine, pointing that this stain was most likely from consensual sex between the two. This new finding on the stain led the Innocence Project towards Michael, and in July of 2000, 15 years later, they agreed to take on his case. This case is my first time truly looking into the Innocence Project and what they stand for. So I want to pause for just a second to read to you their mission statement from their website. The Innocence Project works to free innocent, prevent wrongful convictions, and create fair, compassionate, and equitable system of justice for everyone. Our work is guided by science and grounded in anti-racism. From what I have seen from the work they do, they keep true to their mission statement. And Michael Morton is no exception. In 2005, his attorneys filed for requests on items like fingernail scrapings, the bandana, and evidence found from a separate homicide to be retested. The separate homicide was the homicide of a woman named Debra Masters Baker. About 2 years after Christine's murder, when Michael had already been charged and convicted for the crime, another murder very similar, not too far from where the Mortons lived, happened. Debra's family seems to keep a lot of information on her private, which I believe is to preserve her memory in a way that they feel comfortable, and that is perfectly okay. I believe that the families are entitled to their privacy and they should grieve however works for them, for however long. What we know about Debra is that she was born on May 19th, 1953. She is described as being a generous and protective sister. She was so loved by her family. Her mother still holds on to pictures of Debra's favorite horse and clippings from when she wrote as a student in journalism. She was a loving wife and she loved her children, Jesse and Caitlin, and she loved to wear her favorite pink sweatsuit. On January 13th, 1988, she fell victim to the same person who took the life of Christine. Debra and Christine were both young, beautiful moms, home alone with their young children. They both had long, dark hair. Both women's cause of death was from blunt force trauma while they slept. Both women were covered with items after their death, and their purses had been taken from the scene of the crime. One huge difference was that Debra had been separated from her husband at the time, and her case was left with no answers for her loved ones for over 23 years. This was until the Innocence Project got involved with Michael Morton and started pushing for more. When they pushed for more in 2005, the court granted testing on the fingernail scrapings and the evidence from Debra's murder, but not the bandana found on the Mortons' property. Nothing found with these new tests could prove Michael was innocent or give Debra Baker's family any answers. Then, in 2008, District Attorney Greg Abbott ordered District Attorney John Bradley to give Michael's lawyer the investigation documents. That's when they found all the evidence that was not available before, like the dark green van and the man who came with it, and all of the new evidence I mentioned that was hidden from the lawyers during his original trial. Like, the day after Christine's murder, a business called the Jewel Box reported someone used her credit card in the store, and the officer who took the call was able to identify the woman who used the card, but this was never looked into by Sergeant Wood. Christine's mother reported that Eric saw a monster with gloves and a big mustache hack his mom in bed with something wooden. He was able to confirm that Michael was not home and it wasn't him. The monster then put a blue suitcase and baskets on Christine. Christine's mother then told investigators to look for the monster and not focus on the domestic. The investigator tried to dismiss Eric's statement and Christine's mother, saying that Michael was wearing a full-body scuba suit and that's why Eric didn't recognize him. The investigators suggested not to have Eric say anything or mention it ever again. A man named John Cross also came forward to tell investigators that he had sent Christine a $20 check to cover some of the costs of Eric's surgery. John then said that this check was cashed 9 days after her murder with a forged signature. Sergeant Wood wrote in his notes that Christine's relatives seemed to think her purse was stolen. Of course, we know better. These sealed documents from Sergeant Wood's investigation revealed a lot, including the fact that the judge, before sealing the documents, had only seen 2 of the documents now available: the consent search from the day of the murder and 5 pages of findings from the day of the murder. With this new information, progress was going to be made. After 23 years, in January of 2010, the bandana found on scene by Christine's brother was able to be tested. That June, DNA from the bandana showed a single hair on the bandana and blood was from Christine. But there was a single DNA profile from a man that did not match Michael Morton. This DNA was put into a database on August 19, 2011, and a match was made to a man named Mark Allen Norwood. Mark Norwood had a conviction in the state of California for drug possession in 2009, and in 1987, around the time of the murders, he was charged in a string of burglaries near his home in Austin that also happened to be near both of the women's homes. On August 24th, 2011, shortly after this DNA match, Nina Morrison and John Rayleigh from the Innocence Project sat down with the cold case team and police to take a closer look into Mark Norwood. They found that a hair at the scene of Debra's homicide was a match to Mark Norwood. On September 26, 2011, Michael's defense attorney reported to the county prosecutor that Michael needed to be released as soon as possible, but the county prosecutors said they needed more time to review. 4 days later, the district attorney agreed Michael would not have been found guilty if all this evidence was there at the time of his trial. And on October 4th, 2011, Michael Morton was released from prison after 24 years, 9 months, and 11 days. The night he got out, Michael went to dinner with his family and lawyers. He then stayed at a hotel room for the night before moving in with his parents in Liberty City, Texas. He had a lot to learn, especially with the changes in technology, and just having a cell phone was mind-blowing to him. He was most excited, though, to reconnect with his son, Eric. A few weeks after Michael's release, he was able to meet up with Eric and his wife, Maggie, who was expecting their first child. The two struggled to reconcile after Eric was raised by Christine's family, who were still very weary and hurt, trying to come to terms with everything that had happened from losing Christine to everything with Michael and Eric. Eventually, Eric was able to start rebuilding a relationship with his father, with some push and help from his wife, Maggie. Michael taught Eric about Christine and shared stories that were too hard for her family to talk about. Then, in full circle, on December 19th, 2011, Mark Norwood was arrested and Michael was exonerated from the homicide of Christine. In 2012, Mark Norwood was taken to trial for the murder of 31-year-old mother and wife Christine Morton and sentenced to life in prison. Then, in September of 2006, at the age of 64, he was found guilty for the murder of 34-year-old wife and mother Debra Baker and sentenced to his second life sentence. When his sentence was given for Debra's death, Michael had this to say: "Most time, life is not fair. You don't get what you deserve, and you don't get what you want. Today's a little bit different for the Baker family, who waited so very long, and also for Mark Norwood, who waited so very long for what he deserves. Our government doesn't always get it right, but today they did." As for her daughter Caitlin, I think she may have given the strongest statement that day, saying, "Mr. Norwood, my name is Caitlin Baker. Debra Baker was my mother, and I am here on behalf of my grandmother, my brother, my mother's siblings, and my father. I was just shy of 4 years old when she was murdered, and so I've spent majority of my life waiting for this day. I am often told that I look like her. I hope that when you find the courage to look at me, you see my mother staring back at you. Today, I am my mother's voice. My mother was selfless, generous, and a loving woman. From an early age, she had a passion for writing and earned her degree in journalism from the University of Texas. She was hardworking and dependable, and she would never back down from a challenge. When something needed to be done, she did it. If she didn't know how to do something, she learned. Mom loved Barbra Streisand, dramatic movies, and Dr. Pepper. She lived on coffee, always had a cigarette, and was a night owl. She always had her liquid black eyeliner with her, and it was always applied perfectly. That is not a skill shared by her sisters or her daughter. She had been teaching her sisters, but didn't get the chance to teach me. She was a big fan of technology, like the early Apple computers, and she thought her massive car phone was the coolest ever. She was the ultimate big sister who took care of everyone. She was very close with her siblings and her mother. Everyone hung out at her house to drink coffee, to talk, or watch movies. Her living room was Grand Central Station for the family. I remember watching a movie called The Goonies with her. It wasn't a particularly scary movie, but she would pretend to be afraid so that I would be brave and tough and protect her. I have only few memories with her, but all of them she was being playful and silly with me. I've had to rely on stories to know most things about my mom, but I do not need anyone to tell me that she was a wonderful mother to my brother and I. Her death was absolutely devastating to everyone who knew her. It was a gut-wrenching, never-ending ache that was made worse by the senselessness of murder. The only thing we ever knew for sure was that she didn't deserve it. She was a good woman who lived for her children and her family. But her story did not end there. She has never truly left us. She has been with us, all of us, at every moment of our lives. She has been the voice that assures us everything is going to be okay, and that reminds us to be kind to one another. She will not be remembered as a victim or a case number. She remains our mother, our sister, our daughter, and our friend. Mr. Norwood, I have seen no expression or remorse from you, from the choices that you have made that ultimately led to all of us in this courtroom. I have heard no compelling evidence that indicates to me that you are not the man responsible for my mother's death. I accept the conclusion found by this jury. I now recognize you as the person who stole my mother from me. You are a murderer, you are a thief, you are a coward. We will be grateful to leave this room and never see your face again. Mark Norwood was not the only one who got what they deserved. The prosecutor who played a huge role in Michael's wrongful conviction also faced justice. In fact, he is the only prosecutor to face justice for wrongful conviction, when there has been 729 people exonerated from wrongful convictions since 1989. Prosecutor Michael Kent Anderson went on to become a state judge. He was charged with criminal contempt and tampering with evidence. He resigned from his position as a state judge and surrendered his law license. He was then sentenced to 10 days in jail and was released on good behavior after just 96 hours. That same year, Michael Anderson had to face the consequences of his actions. The Michael Morton Act was passed. This requires prosecutors to share evidence favorable for the defense to their attorneys. Though none of this brings back the time these 3 children lost with their mother, we can only hope that it brings some sort of peace knowing that the man who took their mother is no longer out there on the streets hurting others, and that he is serving his time for what he did. None of this will bring back the time Michael Morton lost with not only Eric but in life, but because of him, others have greater chances to fight wrongful convictions. Michael actually wrote a book about this whole experience, which I will share in the episode notes, if you would like to read it yourself. For now, I want to thank you for listening today. If you like the podcast, please leave a good review and share with whoever you can. If you like topics like this, please let me know by telling me in your reviews or on social media. I am currently having a sale on my merch store for the holiday season. Please feel free to check that out and buy some holiday merch. Till next time, please be safe out there, and I will see you on the next episode.